All right, I guess let's get going since it's about 2 after 7, and we have a huge amount of information to talk about tonight. So thanks everyone for joining on this wonderful Wednesday evening before the big storm hits. Tonight we're talking about insurance coverage. Whether you ride your bike thousands of miles every year for fun, are an active commuter, or a regular walker from your car to the grocery store or mailbox, this insurance-focused webinar is for you. Our country's obsession with cars and moving them quickly rather than moving people safely really necessitates that we're looking after ourselves and others as best as possible. Post-crash expenses are a serious issue, and the insurance we purchase is often inadequate due to our misunderstanding of finer details. Tonight, we're going to talk about those details and how we can make insurance work better in cases of property loss, injury, or death. My name is Eric De Silva. Welcome to the Bicycle Coalition of Maine's Wednesday webinar. The Bicycle Coalition is a nonprofit organization and is Maine's statewide voice for both people on bikes and people walking. We strive to make Maine more bike and walkable through advocacy, education, and encouragement. Please visit our website at bikemaine.org to learn more. Thank you to all our supporters, and a big thank you to Tandem Coffee for sponsoring our webinar series. Tonight, we have two wonderful guests, and they are insurance agent Bob O'Brien of Noyes Hall and Allen Insurance in South Portland, and bicycle and pedestrian attorney Laurie Boxer-McComber of Kelly, Remmel, and Zimmerman in Portland. And Laurie is also a member of Bike Law. So thank you for joining Laurie and Bob tonight. So I guess, let's start by trying to understand better what we can do ahead of time as individuals to make a difference for ourselves, our families, and for others when we're thinking about insurance. Laurie, is this something you want to talk about?
Sure. I wanted to start out with just some basics on why this is a good idea to think about your insurance situation, your whole situation, health insurance, auto insurance, home insurance, ahead of time. The first reason is because it's just the right thing to do to be a good citizen. Everyone here is probably a driver in addition to being a bicyclist or a pedestrian. And if we ended up in a situation where we hurt someone else, we would want, I think, to make sure that they had some form of a remedy, and money often isn't enough, but we'd want to make sure that that person was made whole after we hurt them. So the first reason we want to do this is really more for the public. We want to make sure that people are cared for and have money for their health insurance and for their expenses after there's been a crash. But we also, want to do this because we want to protect ourselves and our family. So if you don't carry enough insurance and you hurt someone, or if you don't carry enough insurance and you're hurt by someone who doesn't carry enough insurance, then you can end up truly bankrupt, whether you're the person that hit someone. So here's a situation, like I have seen many cases where people are very well heeled. They have a ski home at Sugarloaf, they have a second house somewhere, and they may only have the Maine minimum insurance. And if that happens and they hurt someone, then they're at a loss because their insurances might only cover the first $50,000 of that person's situation, and then their assets are at risk. So there are good reasons for you all here tonight to be looking at how you could help someone if you hurt them, but also how to protect yourself if you hurt someone, or how to make sure that you have the right coverage if someone who doesn't carry insurance and or who only carries a small amount of insurance hurts you, how you can have the right protections in place. And so that's the reason we're here tonight, is really to help you get your insurance binder in order, and help give you some questions that you can ask your own insurance agents to make sure that you have the things in place that you want to have in place, and make informed decisions as you move forward. So that's really, I'm just framing of why we're here and what we hope to accomplish with you all tonight. And I also want to just throw out the caveat that an hour is not enough time to cover all the different scenarios, and when one of these unfortunate traffic events happens, it's going to be very fact specific, and the insurance policies and contracts are all going to be so different. So even though we're going to give you some basics, you have to keep in mind that it's going to be very fact and situation dependent if any of these events ever happen to you.
Thanks, Lori. So, Bob, you're an agent. What types of insurance are, this feels to me like if we're traveling, it's really centered around auto insurance. But I think you have some more to say about that, and that there's actually more variety here than just auto. What type of insurance are people purchasing and or carrying, and why are they choosing that? And just help us understand, like, I guess some of the options out there, and maybe some of the vocabulary as well.
Sure. So the good news is that most people who either own a home or have a car have some of the insurance that they don't think necessarily covers them when they're a pedestrian or a bicyclist. But for example, if you're riding your bike and you injure someone, your homeowner's insurance actually has liability coverage. Most people buy home insurance and they think about covering the home and the stuff that's in it. But liability insurance is an important part of home insurance, and really liability is a lot of what Laurie and I will be talking about tonight. So you know, folks don't always think, well, I'm out on my bike, my home insurance covers me, but in some cases it does. And then the other thing that people get surprised by is why does my car insurance cover me when I'm riding my bike? That doesn't seem to make much sense. But there is actually some coverage in your auto insurance policy, if you have one, that can and will apply if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist. So,
And a
And
quick
we also have,
caveat. Oh, sorry. I just want to
yeah,
do a quick caveat on that one too, because what I'm finding is perhaps the policies Bob sells, which most policies in Maine do apply. If you're hit by a car and you're out bicycling or walking, they do apply, and you have some medical payment money available to you. But there are certain companies in Maine that are taking the position that only pedestrians are covered and not bicyclists. So that's an interesting thing that I'm seeing, just so you know, like that's a important thing to ask your insurance company. And when we get to questions that you're gonna ask them, is whether they're one of the companies that declines coverage for bicyclists, or whether they're one of the ones that provides it if you're hit.
is this a small percentage of companies out there, Lori, or is it pretty common that bicyclists would not be covered under this type of coverage?
I have come across 3 companies over that say no, it's just for the medical payment portion of the policy, and so it's a specific provision in there, but it's just something to keep in mind and ask your carrier about. It's one little nuanced thing, so I don't want to get hung up on it, but I do think it is an important thing, because I used to take it for granted, and then I'm starting to see some companies that are saying, no, we only read pedestrians, because the policies usually say pedestrian, and then they're read in the industry to include bicyclists, but we're seeing some people that are some companies that are saying, no, we're going to read it as pedestrian only means people that are walking or jogging.
Okay, so I wanted to go back to what Bob was saying too. We're talking about homeowners and auto insurance, but we're also talking about renters insurance. Am I correct there?
yeah,
Is
renter's
there,
insurance is essentially a kind of homeowner's insurance. It's yeah, you get the same coverage, liability coverage, and you can buy the same limits that you can buy on a homeowner policy. So whether you own a condo, whether you rent, or whether you own a home, you know, your personal liability coverage you can buy through that. So,
and like, I don't think this is going to be a large percentage of the folks that are participating in tonight's call or listening to this in the future, but there are people out there that may not be renting and may not be owning a car or a home. Perhaps they're taking a couple years off to travel, or they're trying out a new style of lifestyle. So what are there options available for people in that scenario?
if there are, I don't sell them or I don't know about them. You know, I just know about folks who buy either home, condo, or renter's insurance. I don't know of a personal liability policy that you can buy if you're not living in one place.
It's
Folks,
interesting.
for example, who get in an RV and drive around the country and only have a PO box someplace, they're very difficult to insure because they don't have a home base, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bob. Okay, so let's talk about some of those other questions. So Lori talked about one of them already. Will your insurance company cover you if you're on a bicycle versus a pedestrian? Ideally, we want both. So what other questions do we want to ask our insurance companies when we go and we're shop around, or after this call tomorrow, call to ensure that we are properly and healthily covered, and for ourselves and others as well?
Right.
Sure.
So some of these are covered in some of the links that I sent you, Eric, to distribute to the group afterwards. So if you don't catch all these right now, know that there's some of this information is in the article that I wrote about a decade ago, but it's still, some of the same questions and in some of the other links. But the first question I would ask my insurance company is, what type of liability coverage do I have? Meaning, if I hurt someone else, how much coverage do I have? Do I have the Maine minimum, which is 50,000? Do I have, and a lot of people think, oh, if I have double that, I'm in good shape, 100,000. Is it per person, or is it a single, what is it called, Bob? Single limits?
Combined single limits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Combined single limits.
Yeah. So what type of liability coverage do I have? And how much would it cost if I doubled that, or if I got the maximum amount? So Eric kept pressing Bob and I about what would be your recommendation. And Bob and I are like, if anyone ever asks me, or my husband who's attending, I always am like, get the most coverage possible. But you can find out from your insurance company, what the difference is between a $50,000 policy and $1 million policy. So you want that. You want to find out what you have, how much it would cost you per year to increase it, and look at that. And you also want to look at, can you get umbrella coverage? Meaning, if something goes really wrong, can I get another policy that covers just a horrific event? And unfortunately, we see those all the time, because if you're out riding with a group of 5 people and someone hits you, or you hit someone and you hit those 5 riders, that's definitely not going to be enough insurance.
You mean the 100,000 would be inadequate? You really want to have, is that what you're saying, Lori?
Right. Like, put bicyclists and pedestrians aside for a minute. If you're just driving down the highway and you happen to hit a family going to Sugarloaf, and the family's in that car, and they have a couple of their kids, have a friend or two with them, and you hit them, and you only have $100,000 worth of insurance for the whole event, and you've injured all those people, everything you have in the way of assets that's not protected by bankruptcy is going to be gone. So you just want to look at that. And even, I've seen bicyclists on pedestrians, or pedestrians on bicyclists, these horrible cases where a pedestrian steps out in front of a bicyclist, or a bicyclist doesn't see a pedestrian in a crosswalk or whatever it may be. And those actually can be catastrophic. They can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, or millions sometimes, because if someone hits their head, or their lungs collapse or whatever it may be, even those, you wouldn't think a bicyclist on a pedestrian would be a huge case. But so you want to know what you have in the way of liability protection. And then you also want to know what you have in the way of uninsured or underinsured coverage, meaning if the person that hurts me doesn't have enough money to cover me, what do I have for coverage to protect me? Because in Maine, you've got underinsured or uninsured coverage that can supplement what the other person has. So for example, if Eric hit me and he had a $50,000 policy, and I carried a $500,000 policy, my own policy would supplement $450,000 that Eric's did not cover.
And that $500,000 policy, Lori, would be what you have for underinsured, or is there a way for your personal liability number to jump in that scenario and provide coverage?
Often your liability doesn't pay for liability means you're at fault. It means responsibility. So
But can't cover yourself at all with that number.
no, but usually your uninsured or underinsured coverage is identical to your UM coverage or your UIM coverage, your underinsured or your
Okay.
uninsured. So
Just to be clear, we're talking about car insurance. This is on your auto insurance policy.
right.
Yeah.
So, and same thing with your homeowners. You're going to want to ask them what type of liability coverage you have. And then all auto policies and home policies or commercial policies, like if you have a business, often have medical payment coverage as well, which is money that kicks in to help cover uncovered medical bills or deductibles or whatever you have. So if you have like a $4,000 deductible on your health insurance policy, your automobile policy will have money, regardless of who's at fault, that is available to you. So most automobile policies, if you're a bicyclist or a pedestrian and there's a fight about who's responsible, or it's going to take a long time for you to resolve your claims with the driver, you can use your medical payment coverage to cover your medical expenses in the meantime. And you can buy, I've seen policies for, I don't know if you have seen a $500,000 MedPay policy, but I think I once saw one for 250,000. But that's really nice money so that you, if you're not at fault, but you're in the hospital for a while and you have all these co-pays, or you need, home care, home nursing care, or whatever it may be, it's nice to have that. And that often isn't that expensive to increase the premium on that, and get good coverage. So that is another question you're going to ask your insurance agent is, how much medical payment coverage do I have? Do I have the Maine minimum, which is 2,000, or do I have something more? And that's the one where I think you would probably see the premiums don't go up too much. Am I right on that, Bob, or am I?
Medical payments coverage isn't super expensive. In at least with the companies that I've seen, you typically can't buy more than 25,000 in, for most of our companies. But 2,000 is the state minimum. And what a lot of people do is they'll say, well, my medical insurance deductible is 5,000, so I'm going to buy $5,000 a person.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because what most people don't realize and we're not going to get too far into the weeds, but when it comes time for subrogation, meaning the insurance companies, like let's say you get a big settlement, you often will have to pay your auto insurance and your health insurance back. And some health insurance policies make you pay penny for penny back because they're special ERISA plans or government plans, and they won't negotiate with you and try to help you out. Some of them will, it's all very fact dependent, but your auto policy by law, if you have an attorney, has to reduce its subrogation claim. So some people want to use their auto instead of their health because they're not going to have to pay it back as much. It's, again, something that gets complicated, but it's another question to be asking your insurance agent is just how much medical payment coverage can I get and how much will it cost? And then you're also going to want to ask about property damage. For homeowners insurance, you want, as bicyclists, especially those of you that might have many bikes or really nice bikes that might be worth more than your car, like many people we know here, you want to make sure that you're getting replacement value on your bike, not a depreciated value, and you're going to want to know what the deductible is. So that's the type of question you're going to want to ask when it comes to property insurance. And then if you've got children or partners, like domestic partners, you're going to want to make sure if you want those people covered, that you understand how that coverage is going to work, especially if your children are in different places and may not be residing in your house all year round.
Okay, that wasn't one of my questions. So if someone's involved in a crash or some sort of scenario, and I'm the policyholder, and my children or my spouse are not with me, but they're involved in a crash, they can be covered under this policy, even if the driver of the vehicle is like, let's say my children are in a car crash or they're riding their bikes and are hit by somebody, they can be covered by my auto insurance in that case, if I carry that, and I've asked these questions of my insurance agent.
Under your uninsured and your medical payment, usually.
Yes, okay. And homeowners and or renters. So we just call homeowners and renters the same thing.
No. They're not going to be covered. They are not going to be covered under your homeowners and renters insurance.
Okay, so I lost track
If
of
your
that.
kid knocked down a runner, which unfortunately mine did one time, and the runner was okay, so we didn't have an insurance claim. But you know, of course, it's running through my mind, right? But if your child rode their bike into a runner and that runner broke their whatever, their shoulder, and your liability homeowners insurance would most likely cover that.
Right. Okay. So as far as personal medical expenses go, we're looking at auto insurance only. There is nothing in the homeowner's policy that would protect us.
Correct. That's to pay for other people's for damage that you're responsible for other people, either
Okay,
their
so
property or their injuries.
jumping ahead a little bit then, what do people without car insurance do? Sorry, what do people that aren't car drivers, that don't own a car, do in a situation where they want to provide protection for themselves? Is it all in their health insurance then?
You can purchase something called a name non-owners policy. Not many people do it, but it's for people who don't own a vehicle, but sometimes might either drive one that they aren't sure is insured properly, or they want to get that uninsured motorist coverage. You can buy what they call a name non-owner policy. You can buy $500,000 of uninsured motorist coverage, and if you get struck by a hit and run driver, that uninsured motorist coverage is available.
Okay, that would be your recommendation then, Bob, for someone who doesn't own a vehicle?
I'll tell you, not many people buy name non-owners. Most people don't even know that the thing exists. So it doesn't come up very often, but it is a product that's available. It's surprisingly expensive. It costs about 25% of what it might cost you for an auto insurance policy if you had a vehicle. It's not as cheap as you'd think it would be. You know, I'm a bicyclist. You know, I'm not using that insurance much, but it does exist, and the coverage is real. So,
But that's the sad thing, Eric. I think this is, you know, I see this often where we have these lovely people who have decided they're going to be car free, and they're committed to being active commuters. They're committed to getting their groceries on their, you know, walking and bicycling. And they've decided, some of them, I'm not even going to get my license, right? And then they get hit and they had no idea, like, you know, if the person that hit them, I had one of these, you know, last year, the person that hit them had 50,000. That was another young person, you know, the young person on young person crash. The other young person had no assets whatsoever. And so, you know, the person who got hit is limited to a $50,000 recovery. That's it. That's all, you know, and so then a good attorney can negotiate the heck out of all the liens and help them to get something. But that's, you know, so that's something to think about. And so I guess I don't know, Bob would be the better one to talk about, because I don't talk about this because I don't sell insurance. But I think if there's a way to stay on a household member's insurance policy, or you know, be a named driver on someone else's car if you live with someone, or to stay on your parents' policy if there's a way of doing that, and being, you know, making it all clear to the insurance company what is going on and how. If there's a way to stay insured, I think it's worth it. And so this is something to look at if you're a parent of kids that are, you know, in their early 20s and are
not really thinking about these things themselves, or sometimes it's a situation where, like, you know, your domestic partner has insurance and you don't think you need it because you don't use a car, but it's wise to get on your domestic partner's insurance policy. So it's just a look out for that.
Okay. Well, so let's recap those questions before we move on to the next topic. We got personal liability, and that's with our auto and our homeowners. We have uninsured or underinsured. That's with auto only. Medical payment coverage. That's also auto only. Is that correct, Lori?
That's
In
it.
medical payment, no. Homeowners sometimes, like, so for example, if a homeowner's landscaping company leaves a bunch of rocks in the road, that, you know, the medical payment coverage for the homeowners will apply in a bicycle situation. Like, so yeah, you as a homeowner do want to find out what your med pay coverage is too, because if someone gets hurt on your property, walking or biking, especially in Maine, walking, ice, you want to
Okay.
know what that is, liability
Okay.
and med pay.
And then our homeowners will also provide property damage in the case of a theft or damage to the equipment. And then we're also we want to ask our agent also about how our family is going to be covered in lots of scenarios. And those scenarios are about what we're going to talk about next. And we already talked about the one scenario where you might have a car-free individual. And so there's a lot of scenarios. This is where our 1 hour of time is not going to cut it. But what are some common scenarios, and how are the different types of coverage going to come into play to provide protection? Lori or Bob, I'm not sure which one of you is feeling up to talking about this.
I can talk about it forever, but I think Bob should have some.
Yeah, I can give some general examples, and Laurie has seen stuff, so she certainly can tell some stories, make it real. But so, you know, the general scenarios are simple kind of driver versus bicyclist. If I'm driving my car and I hit a cyclist, my liability insurance is what's going to pay to fix them up and repair their bike or replace their bike. If I'm a cyclist and I'm hit by a driver, then their insurance is going to pay first if they have any. If they don't have any, then my own uninsured motorist insurance and medical payments coverage on my own auto policy would cover me.
And if they don't have any, that's the same as them doing a hit and run.
That's uninsured motorist, yeah.
Yeah, and a hit and run would be the same scenario.
Yeah, hit and run is, Laurie can correct me if I'm wrong, but a hit and run basically is, you know, you can't identify the at-fault party, and so the policy basically responds in that case. So that's, you know, that's one scenario, which is kind of typical what we all as cyclists and pedestrians sort of fear the most, which is getting hit by a car or hitting somebody ourselves. So, you know, that's sort of the most common situation. You can have situations like Laurie said, where your kids or you are out riding and you scrape the side of somebody's car. You know, you're as you're biking, you scrape paint or something like that. You do have liability coverage on your homeowner policy for that. I do want to make sure we talk later about e-bikes, because e-bikes are a complication here, but let's limit it to acoustic bikes for the moment. So that's probably the most common one that we all worry about, and then the hit and run sort of built into that. So Laurie can talk a little bit, I think, about damage that's caused by surface defects and potholes and road and that sort of thing, because that's a legal kind of thing as opposed to more of an insurance thing. So.
Right. So those cases are really interesting. I've had quite a number of them, and they come in different forms. The most important thing, if you ever have a crash involving a surface defect or debris or something that's been left on the roadway, is to make sure you can document it as soon as possible, because those circumstances change very quickly and people remedy problems. And so the most important thing, and unfortunately, a lot of times people are concussed or in the hospital, so they aren't able to quickly document their situation, the surface condition. But to the extent that that ever happens, even if you don't ever think you're going to bring a claim, hopefully you like have a pact with your people you're out biking with, that if something ever happens to anyone, it's going to get documented as soon as possible, even if the person's saying, no, I'm okay. Because a lot of times people do say, no, I'm okay. And then they realize they have something broken 3 hours later and it's too late. So you always want to get police and documenting things and document them yourself. But those are interesting cases because generally, if it's a case against a municipality or the state, there are lots of provisions in the law that allow those municipalities and the state to be immune. But then there are some exceptions, immune meaning they don't have to pay. But then there are some exceptions if construction work is taking place. So if there's like a paving situation and the paving entity like goes home and leaves this huge lip and doesn't mark it, lip on the side of the road or lip for your bike to get caught in or whatever, there could be liability on the part of the state. But state insurance or liability is often capped. There's like a certain amount you can get, and you have to follow a special procedure for noticing. So these are just, again, I can't touch on every single nuance, but the key takeaways are document, call the police, get any camera footage, everything you can, or have family members do it if you get hurt. And don't just go making statements to insurance companies until you've talked to someone who knows how to handle these cases, because they're very specific and nuanced. And the other thing is sometimes people
Lori?
just, what was that?
So if you back up a moment, you said
Yeah.
very quickly. So can you help us understand what quickly means in this context? As far as gathering this storyline of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, if you're hurt and there's anyone around, another driver or whatever, I mean, you're going to want to get medical attention if you're hurt. But if there are multiple people and one person's helping you get medical attention, you can say, well, someone please take pictures.
Okay. So the quickness is before the scene returns to a normal looking area.
Yeah, and this is where we can be good colleagues to our, the people we bike with, or even good citizens, like stopping, like the people, I can't tell you, like sometimes just these people, I'll have cases where the police did not do anything. It's just shocking. The investigation is so weak and there are no photos or whatever, but some nice person decided they were going to help, and they, even though my client's unconscious, they somehow get, their phone number or their wife's phone number, or like leave a piece of paper that says, I have photos. So as citizens, we can be sensitive to the fact that people, when they're involved in these crashes, meet other bicyclists and pedestrians and just good human beings to help. It doesn't mean that every time you see a crash, you have to like start pulling over on the side of the road and doing it. But if you're out with your colleague, this is the classic situation as a group ride or something where someone gets hurt because of a real defect, and they want to like be Superwoman or Superman or super person, and they are like, no, I'm fine. And then they go home and they're like, oh my God, this really hurts. And they find out they have, broken bones or a concussion. And then all of a sudden they're paying their deductible to go to the emergency room that night, and like there's all these expenses, and they didn't think to like call the police and make sure everything's properly documented and take photos and the like.
Yeah.
So I'm giving you an extreme situation, but it's not actually that uncommon. So, it's important to figure out where it is, who owns that land, who left the defect, because often like there's someone that would say like, oh, it was that landscaping company, they blah, blah, blah. Like, but the sooner you do it in time to the event, the more likely you're going to be successful with the claim. But then there's the situation of, you guys know the Fix-It apps that like many cities have. Portland has a Fix-It app where you can see a pothole that needs to be filled, and you can call it in. So there's a law in Maine that says you can get up to $6,000. It's not much. But if you end up being hurt in something on a surface defect, that was left by a municipality. So like if my husband called in the city of Portland and said, there's a huge pothole, someone's gonna trip on this walking their dog because it's like right next to the sidewalk or whatever, right near the crosswalk, and no one's doing anything about it. And then the city did not fix it within a set period of time, and they were on notice of it. If someone else then goes and gets hurt, and they have a good understanding and say like, were there ever any reports about this? And they do a Freedom of Information Act request for all the complaints about that particular defect, then they can get their $6,000.
Yeah.
But it's,
Lori,
again, I'm like probably getting too far into the weeds here.
well, there's a lot of weeds to go into. We're talking a lot about deferred maintenance, perhaps, of the infrastructure. What if it is that the infrastructure was never intended to really provide a safe environment for bicycles or people walking or pedestrians? So what if it's an inadequate design, the original design of the infrastructure, and there is an injury or fatality?
So often cities and counties and the state are immune from those types of claims. They can be made, they're being successfully made in other places, but in Maine, it's very, very hard to do that. You might be able to tag the engineering company that designed it for them, but they may fall under the immunity as well. So again, very fact specific, but often those are really hard claims to make, and they're very expensive to make. So if you just break your clavicle, to like really dig deep and have to establish that this, was designed poorly and figure out who's responsible for that poor design, and allowing that to happen, it's going to be very expensive. And then fighting the municipality on that particular issue when it was probably approved through a bunch of different standards that were in place at the time, is going to be it's just going to be a hard case. And so often when those types of cases are brought, they're brought in like a very tragic situation, and people are willing to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into fighting the state, and there's some good reason or some hook that they can, basically hang their hat on for that claim. But they're hard. So it's hard to say like you put the crosswalk 3 feet to the left when it shouldn't have been 3 feet to the left, and tag liability on the city versus a driver that might have had their cell phone in their hand, because the city is going to still say this crash, really the real cause of this crash is that driver was on their phone, not that the crosswalk was placed too close to the corner.
Yeah. Okay. So is there more you wanted to say about like these infrastructure or construction? Otherwise, I was going to ask Bob a question.
Just that the construction cases, that's one of the exceptions to the immunity. So if there's a construction case going on and you get hurt in a construction zone, you're going to have a much better chance of recovering. But your recovery is going to be capped to the state or local cap under the Tort Claims Act, and you're still going to have to make your case. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're still going back to all those other questions that we need to ask our agents. Yeah.
Well, and this is why I think, yeah, you ask your agents, but if you get involved in a crash, and it does not have to be me, but I highly recommend, if, anyone I knew was involved in a crash, even if it was a small one, I think before you start trying to handle it on your own, the best thing is to talk to someone that understands all of these nuances right away before you start talking to your insurance company or anyone else.
Okay. So this is a lot, we're dealing with, this is all with injury and fatalities. If I were to lose a piece of my equipment due to theft or damage it, let's say I am riding down the road and I have a very nice bike and I damage it or break it because I do something stupid and crash. Um, I am physically okay, but my equipment is broken. So Bob, does this property damage that our homeowners, that we carry as homeowners, can that cover that? And feels simple, right? I just pay the deductible and then if I have like the replacement costs, as I've already confirmed that my insurance agent will my insurance company covers, then I am able to replace that broken piece of equipment or stolen piece of equipment. Is it that easy?
Well, yes and no. It depends on what happens. So theft is an easy one. Pretty much every homeowner's policy or renter's policy, condo policy is going to cover theft. Your policy deductible would apply. So if you've got a, $3,000 bike and you've got $1,000 deductible, you get $2,000 out of it. Theft is probably the most common property claim we see for bikes. It's a problem everywhere. There is coverage for some other things, road hazards like potholes and hitting a curb and just taking a digger and damaging your bike. That's not going to be covered by your homeowner's policy. But damage by a vehicle. So if you pull into your garage and accidentally crunch your bike, that's going to be covered under your property coverage for your homeowner's policy. If you forget that you've got the bike on the roof and you drive into the garage, I've seen those as well, and those are most insurance companies will consider those to be vehicle damage by a vehicle, and pay for that. So.
Oh, okay. So it really has to involve the vehicle for at least a
Kind of has
damage
to involve the
coverage.
vehicle. I've had cases where somebody forgot to strap their bike on the rack. They put it on the rack and took off, and the bike just fell off in the street. The insurance company did not cover that because it really wasn't, it wasn't caused by the vehicle. It was caused because the person didn't strap the bike on. But in the other cases I'm talking about where the bike was damaged by the fact that you had it on the rack, you drive it into the garage door or whatever. We have stories. So
That's really interesting because they're both equally, not smart moves.
yeah, they are. Yeah. Yeah, except it's sort of they really are, but it's more the one on the highway. The one on the highway was a different deal where the actual the person just forgot to strap their bike onto the rack. So it wasn't even on the highway; it was on their street. But yeah. So yeah, property coverage. The most common thing that most cyclists worry about is theft, and if you've got a property policy, home condo renters, then you have coverage for your stuff. If you've got a really high-end bike, some insurance companies will allow you to do what they call scheduling. So if you've got a $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 bike that you're really worried about, you maybe you take it and travel and race with it or whatever it might be. Actually, racing's not a good example, but do high-end rides. You can actually list it separately, and there can be a lower deductible, and it's also covered for more stuff than your home was.
So what would be someone if there is a theft? What are some things that I'm going to need? Very simple things that I need to make sure I need in order to prove ownership? Or is this something I need to do beforehand, before the theft occurs with my insurance company?
You don't need to identify the bike per se beforehand, typically, unless you're scheduling one of these, high-end carbon bikes or something. But the most important thing is to file a police report. So if it is stolen, make sure you call the police. Even if they don't come and don't do anything, they've made a note on it. And that kind of tags legitimizes the fact that the bike was stolen. So.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
you're,
make sure you do that. And then it's a good idea just to have a picture of your bike. Some of us, I forget the website, but there's a site where you can actually
bike
just,
registry is one of them that
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
familiar with.
Yeah, where you can actually do that, but it's not required to file a homeowner's claim. So,
And you mentioned filling out like a special schedule with maybe a very high-end bike. Where does the number make it a high-end bike suddenly? At
it's
what
really
dollar amount?
up to an individual person. So, it's, it's up to the individual. It's included in your homeowner's policy. Like you've probably got, even renters probably have 20 or $25,000 of coverage for their stuff. And there is no limitation on a bike. If the bike was an $8,000 bike and it got stolen, then it's covered. But scheduling it can give you broader coverage for other things and also tag the value of it ahead of time so that the insurance company doesn't say, yeah, sure, you had an $8,000 bike. So,
Right. Okay, well, so we have some time now, Bob. You had some interest in talking about e-bikes. Let's do that in a few minutes.
yeah. So this hole gets deep very quickly, but the bottom line is, the Bike Coalition has done a good job of working in Augusta and trying to establish what is an e-bike. Is it a bike? Is it a motorcycle? What is it? And so, most of us who have any familiarity with e-bikes know that there are different classes of them. So let's talk for a minute about how insurance companies look at that. And it gets important because insurance contracts they're legal contracts and they're worded very specifically. So e-bikes were never thought of when the homeowner's policy was designed, and they were never really thought of when the auto policy was designed. So your homeowner's policy says that it does not cover operation of a motor vehicle. And so the question is an e-bike a motor vehicle or is it not a motor vehicle? And does it matter if it's a class 1 or a class 2 or a class 3 bike, right? So these things have gotten kind of complicated in terms of how insurance companies look at it. So law, in this case, like the legislatures actually passed a law that sort of codifies this a little bit. But insurance world is a little bit slower to develop. And it's really inconsistent right now in terms of how to cover an e-bike. We have one in my family, and I'll tell you what I did after I explain a little bit about this. So I surveyed 7 of our most popular insurance companies that we do business with in our agency at North Holland Allen. And it's all over the place. 2 of them said e-bikes are covered just like bicycles. They're no different. If you hit somebody on your homeowner's policy is going to apply. If you hit somebody on your bike, your homeowner's policy will apply. If you are hit by somebody else, your auto uninsured motorist coverage will apply. So 2 of the companies out of the 7 said they're covered just like bikes, just like acoustic bikes. One of them said, it depends if the motor was engaged or not. I said, okay, so who rides an e-bike without any assist on, very often? Usually if you have an e-bike, you've got at least the motor on so that you're getting something going. So there was one company that said that we cover it like it was an acoustic bike. If the motor's not engaged, we don't cover it at all if the motor's engaged, which means 90% of the time somebody's on an e-bike, that company doesn't cover it. One said we don't cover them, but we automatically include e-bike liability on your homeowner's policy. So they give you this e-bike liability coverage on your homeowner policy, but from the auto side, you've got nothing from that company. 2 of them said, we sell an e-bike policy, so there'll be no question you've got coverage if you buy one of these e-bike policies. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. One of them, unfortunately, does not sell that product in Maine. there's only one company that I represent that sells an e-bike policy in Maine. On the other one, which is a very well-known company that you might recognize from someone in a white coat, and they sell this policy elsewhere, but they do not sell it in Maine, and I don't know why. I think it's a scale thing. I don't think they would sell enough policies in Maine or I don't think they would. So. And then the final company said, nope, they're not covered in any case. Property liability doesn't matter. It's a motor vehicle. It's not covered under your homeowner's policy. It's not covered under your liability. We're not covering you at all if you have an e-bike. So, so what I did when we got the e-bike is I bought the policy. And the reason why I did is because it erased any question about whether this thing was covered or it wasn't covered. And it also covers it like it was a motor vehicle. So, for example, if I get in a crash riding the thing, if I hit a telephone pole, it's covered for collision, just like an auto would be. So that's the reason why I bought the e-bike policy, and they are not inexpensive. It's, $300 or something for a year for one of these policies. But for me, I'm an insurance guy. I had to kind of feel like I was doing it the right way. So
that's an additional policy that you carry along with all the other policies you might own in your life.
it is. It's literally a motorcycle policy. The type of policy it is a motorcycle policy, and it's for a stupid class 1 e-bike. So, yeah.
And so you found in your research that the best way to achieve that was to choose one of the one company that provides this coverage in the state of Maine, rather than trying to bundle it with some sort of existing auto insurance.
Yeah, there's really, at the time, there wasn't even any company that said we cover them like regular bikes. So there were those two companies that I told you. They said we cover them just like regular bikes. They still don't cover if I hit a telephone pole, but they cover the other things we're talking about, just like I was riding an acoustic bike. So
yeah, okay.
So without getting too complicated about it, I guess what I would say is if you have an e-bike, don't assume that you've got insurance coverage for it.
All right, so that can be
about any of the things we've talked about. So
that's the number 6 question of the questions that we talked about earlier. If you're an e-bike owner, make sure you're talking to your agent about e-bikes.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so
Yeah,
we're entering.
And
Go ahead,
it's not just if you're an owner. I mean, I think this is one of these things, we're out on vacation, we're in DC, and it's like, oh, let's all rent e-bikes. And often you're signing off and saying to the e-bike, rent, whether it's Lime bikes or whatever the type of bike it is, you're all excited with your family or friends, and everyone's going to get these scooters or these bikes. And you just, check the box. Yeah, I agree to whatever this contract says. But you're often potentially basically saying, okay, I'm good with no coverage here. And hoping that if anything goes wrong, it's going to be covered by someone else or by my own policy. But, you just, in those situations, need to know that you're making that decision, because often those contracts have all sorts of things in them that aren't going to offer you protection.
Okay. All right, so we're running low on time, but we do have a number of questions. And if there's anyone else, if any of the listeners tonight would like to ask a question, feel free to put it in the chat or just raise your hand and we can call on you. So Emily had a question. And this is for you, Lori, and maybe we put this in the show notes afterwards. Can you share the names of the 3 companies that you identified that and talked about earlier?
Yeah, and I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that, and it's not because I'm trying to skirt the issue, but I just don't know whether their situation has changed, and I would hate to disparage any insurance company, even though they're not my best friends. I still just wouldn't, on a recorded program, want to name one and have that be incorrect, but they are out there. So I would just say, ask your own company, and whether that applies or not. I think they're going to be straightforward with you if they are.
And I'll tell you that I have not heard that from any of my companies. So, you know, if one of mine is on the list, I'd be interested to know it, but it is, you know, it's, I've never heard that from any of my companies, so.
All right, so call your agent.
Mhm.
Benjamin has a question. Would umbrella insurance cover those people who don't have homeowners or renters insurance?
It doesn't. It's umbrella is excess liability insurance, so it sounds like it would be something that might serve that purpose, but it really doesn't. It's excess coverage above auto or home insurance.
Okay,
But if you,
great.
but Bob, let me ask you this. If you did not own a home and you did not have renter's insurance, am I incorrect that if you had the maximum amount of auto coverage, like you bought a $500,000 auto policy and then bought an umbrella on top of that, then the umbrella would cover, even if you didn't have homeowners or renters, or do you have to own a home?
In theory, that's right because of the way the policy is written, but in practice, insurance companies don't sell umbrella policies if you don't have both of those underlying policies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, we have another question. Are motorists liable for lost earnings in addition to medical expenses if a cyclist is disabled in an accident? Maybe we can rephrase that and say if a cyclist is injured in an accident or killed. So the question is, are motorists liable for lost earnings?
Yeah, so basically, if you have a good representative, they are going to look at all aspects of your damages and help advocate for you to get everything that forms part of your loss and the consequences from the crash. So often it will be everything from, you know, the effects of scarring or permanent impairment to lost wages, sometimes to home nursing care, transportation cost losses, property damage. Just jumping very quickly, like, because this ties in a little bit about other damages. When you do have that $15,000 bike or even a $2,000 bike or $800 bike that is damaged in a crash involving another person or vehicle, you have to make certain choices about whether you want to make your property damage claim against your own policy and let them go seek reimbursement from the driver's insurance, or you go directly to the driver's insurance. And just as another quick takeaway is, I often recommend that you go only to the driver's insurance if you can, and not just go to your own, even though it might be easier, because when you make too many claims against your homeowner's insurance, your policy can go up, even if that claim that you made was, you know, your premiums can go up. So that's just a quick thing to kind of put on your list of, like, if this ever happens to me, I want to look into the driver's insurance covering that versus my own, and then letting my own go after them.
Okay. All right, another question, and I think I know the answer to this, but someone's looking for a lawyer that would practice or focus on bicycle and pedestrian issues. And I think if they're not in the state of Maine, a good recommendation would be for them to visit bikelaw.com. Do you have another recommendation, Lori?
You know, I think, no, I'm bike law. I'm confident in the skills of the attorneys within the bike law network. But I think choosing an attorney is like so many other things, like when you're going to college and you're choosing a college that's going to work for you. Different people are going to work for different, you know, injured persons. And, like, you know, you've got to find someone that you trust and their style works for you. But I do think it's really interesting because a lot of people will say, oh, you don't need to be, you know, you don't need to be a bicyclist or an active commuter or whatever to do this type of law. And they're right. There are plenty of good personal injury attorneys out there that will do an excellent job for people. But I do think that those people out there that have the day-to-day experience kind of just are programmed to know what to look for and where to take the photos and how far to back up and look for the right signs and how to find witnesses and how to advocate for, you know, your full property damage recovery with your bike and everything like that. So I would say, just, you know, if you ever find yourself needing an advocate, look for someone that you trust and look for someone that has a style that's going to work with yours, because a lot of times in Maine, you have 6 years to bring a claim in court. And often, unfortunately, people are injured really badly in these crashes. And so you can be with your attorney. I've had clients that have been with me for many years, 6 or 7 years. So you want to make sure that you're working with someone that that you're gonna be able to work with for that many years. I mean, often it's not 6 or 7 years, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thanks. All right. If there's no more questions, let's try to wrap this up a little bit. So there was one other comment here, which I think was interesting, and it was about another podcast called The War on Cars. And they just, maybe it was like 2 weeks ago, they published a car focus podcast called Car Insurance is Too Cheap. So if you're interested in diving deeper into why car insurance seems so inadequate after everything you've heard today, take a look at that podcast. It was a really good one. It dived into the deep weeds of the costs or lack of adequate car insurance that's out there. Sort of a systematic problem that we have in this country. So I guess I would sum up a lot of this by saying it sounds like I know a lot about myself. I know a lot about what I might be doing and what my lifestyle is like. So it's really up to me to contact my agent and figure out and let them know what I need for coverage. And the easiest thing to do, and I think that's probably what I've done, is say, well, what do most people get for coverage? And just say, yes, I'll do that then as well. So reach out and make sure you're doing that homework tomorrow. And I guess this is an interesting question I've been pondering about, but Lori or Bob, it sounds like there's a lot of, I hope there's a lot of change occurring in our culture, especially with the car dominant sort of iconic American like culture that we live in. And I wonder if the changes that we're seeing with insurance and the huge settlements that are happening, and changes with infrastructure and people, the way they're choosing to live their lives, do you think insurance could play a leading role in changing that car-centric culture that we see in this country?
I'm personally not optimistic in that insurance doesn't tend to insurance has made a lot of money off of cars. Let's put it that way, right? If people didn't drive cars, then they wouldn't need car insurance, and so insurance is a kind of a closed network that unfortunately kind of benefits from America's car-centricness. So I don't see a lot of advocacy within the insurance business to push other kinds of transportation.
That's a shame. I would love for insurance companies to say, you know what, that pickup is getting really big, or that infrastructure is getting really dangerous. I think I'm going to raise the premiums a lot on that.
My insurance colleagues won't appreciate me making this comment, but if you look at the safety ratings, the Insurance Highway Institute, a lot of that's funded by insurance companies, and they do good work. But what they really rate vehicles high on is, do they protect the occupant of the vehicle? They don't care about you and I on our bicycles. So,
Right.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate thing. Although, I always try to look for the good thing I can say about the insurance companies. And I would say that we're seeing some, great movement with respect to distracted driving and trying to push for less distracted driving. And so there is hope that some of the steps that they're taking to prevent distracted driving will keep us all safe, because I think, some of these things that they're doing, like putting monitors in people's cars and everything, it's a little bit big brother, but at the same time, there's a chance that will help decrease the number of people that are out there distracted driving and protect those of us who choose to travel in other ways. So who knows, but there are some good efforts there on distracted driving taking place from the insurance companies. But yeah, I don't see them wanting to change the way that you do. And David Zipper, if anyone knows David Zipper, he's a policy, transportation, and other urban planning policy guy, but I think he was asked something similar in an interview I was listening to about, do you think the car companies that are making these bigger and bigger cars are going to, start playing a role in making the cars safer for people outside of them. And even though he was trying to figure out how to say something nice, I think he just didn't feel optimistic that that those companies themselves were going to be the ones to say, no, let's all start making smaller cars. Even though he thought that the people that manage those companies don't want to see the number of deaths that they're seeing outside the cars. But, from a business standpoint, it just doesn't always make sense to say, like, let's start making smaller cars when everyone else in the world is making the car a little bit bigger every year.
All right. Well, any final words, Bob or Lori? Final comments to leave the audience with.
Everyone should support BCM for putting on excellent programs like this one. I am a former board member, but I'm still, even though I'm not on the board right now, a huge supporter of the organization. And it's really important. I think we all have our organizations that we support, but BCM is one of the organizations in the state that is really working hard in so many different ways. In the legislature, in the schools, with community groups to make this a safer place for us to bike and walk. So please, if you enjoyed the program, donate to BCM and figure out ways to get your friends and family to donate as well.
Thanks, Lori. And if you don't want to donate, just come and participate in our webinars, come to one of the rides we do, become a BCM safety instructor. There's lots of ways to participate. Bob, you don't have to say anything about BCM, but I am curious if you have any last comments or words.
No, I'm a member and proud to be one. I think we've covered the topic pretty well. I think it's important to talk to an expert, no matter whether you're talking about legal or insurance. So,
well, thank you both for attending. Thanks for everyone for joining and listening, and I'll see you next time.